Today's show is sponsored by the Magnetic Cloud event on Wednesday, September 15th at 10 a.m. Pacific, hosted by Cisco Investments. Magnetic Cloud is a virtual summit for startup founders and investors. During the summit, executives from Cisco's cloud and compute business and the CEOs from Cohesity, Isovalent, TriggerMesh, and Serverless will discuss Cisco's cloud strategy and how startups can drive success with corporate partners, talk about the latest hybrid cloud and cloud-native trends, and explain some of the incredible opportunities that cloud-native technologies enable. To register for this free virtual event, just go to bit.ly/magnetic-cloud. That's bit.ly/magnetic-cloud. Check out the Magnetic Cloud event on Wednesday, September 15th at 10 a.m. Pacific, hosted by Cisco Investments.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. We have a good bit of cloud news of the week this week. Things are picking up as we finish summer and for the Europeans finish holiday season over there as well. And we're starting to see events starting to tick up for the fall, whether that's, virtual or live as well. Which is actually one of our topics for today after the cloud news. But let's get started with cloud news. First of all, in the interest of security, there was a security summit, and here in the United States, the president organized it, and a lot of the big tech companies were there: Microsoft, Amazon. A lot of big commitments came out of this as well. This reminds me very much of kind of in the initial days when the big public clouds were building out and private clouds and cloud management systems. And all of the big companies that were out there were, hey, we're going to put a bunch of money into this and a bunch of jobs into this. And we're starting to see that with security as well. So, and as part of this cybersecurity summit, Google, Microsoft, and others put in some pretty big investments into all of this. And kind of just scrolling through the article here, Google said it would invest $10 billion over 5 years. Microsoft has committed $20 billion over 5 years. IBM has put some money in. Apple has put some money in. Amazon Web Services said they're going to take some steps to do greater security and security awareness training for its customers. What was really good to see here was the breadth of all of this. This wasn't just the big tech companies. There was as well, JP Morgan Chase was there, TIAA was there, and a broad spectrum of large companies getting together and taking this seriously and having a really good summit. And what are some positive, proactive, short-term steps that they can take to attack security in our industry? On our next bit, and kind of continuing a trend here, Microsoft was mentioned in the last one. Microsoft is in this one as well, and kind of in the center of this one. Former Amazon executive Charlie Bell, it has been confirmed, is over at Microsoft. Now, role is still a little bit to be determined. Everyone decided to, not comment on this, both the Amazon and Microsoft, as well as Charlie Bell himself. So we don't know exactly what is going on. And for those of you that don't know Charlie Bell, he was on the what they call Amazon's S team. So the very, very top leaders, and his responsibilities included everything from pricing and software development and the financial results. And so he was, very influential at Amazon and was probably potentially in consideration for the CEO job as well. And has again decided to move on. And I'm sure Microsoft, this is a major coup for them. And this will be a story that will be interesting to follow for the near future. For our next story, we have the A16Z folks. So Andreessen Horowitz's company. They're starting a seed fund. Now, If you're not familiar with A16Z, first of all, go listen to their podcast. It's a fantastic podcast. Great emerging tech and talking about startups. And they've done a good bit of funding as a venture capital fund over the years, dating all the way back to, 10 years or so at this point. But they have announced a $400 million seed round because seed rounds have been a little bit of their sweet spot over the years. They were in seed rounds for Slack, for Okta, for Databricks, for Instagram and many others. And so that what they wanted to do is a little bit of have a seed fund that focuses nothing but on early stage companies. And, if you're a founder that's out there, what are you looking for when you're taking that seed round? Well, of course, the money's nice and all, but what are the resources that are available? And I think it's pretty safe to say A16Z's reach within the founding industry is second to none. So it's really great to see this as a furthering of the VC industry. And for our last story tonight, another Microsoft story, but unfortunately this one maybe isn't as good. And honestly, maybe goes back to our Security Summit story a little bit. There was a vulnerability found in Azure's flagship database, the Cosmos DB database. Third-party company found this vulnerability and brought it to their attention. What was interesting here was this wasn't necessarily something Microsoft itself could fix. It is now up to their customers. Basically, the read-write keys for the databases can be accessed. And so if those keys are not changed, there's a pretty major vulnerability there. And so now they are asking all of their Cosmos DB customers to change the keys. So this is something, if you are a Cosmos user, you definitely want to pay attention to this. And it's something you'll want to definitely look into, see if you are impacted on that here and in the future. That's it for Cloud News of the Week. And right after the break, it's actually Brian and I today. No guests this week. And what we wanted to do was kind of sit down and talk a little bit about where we're at with education and staying up to speed in the tech industry, and also how COVID and work from home has kind of impacted all of this. And it was a super interesting conversation. And we look forward to doing that right after the break.
Today's show is brought to you by CBT Nuggets. You know how much we value ongoing education on the Cloudcast, and CBT Nuggets is exactly what Aaron and I wish we had when we were trying to get our certification early in our careers. CBT Nuggets is all about bringing a personalized touch to learning about cloud computing, virtualization, networking, DevOps, and much, much more. Whether it's their hands-on labs with personalized coaching or the online chat functions that come up with every instructor-led course, CBT Nuggets' team of experts is always there to help you get the most from your training and your path to certification. You can check it all out at cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast and sign up for a free trial. You get access to the full catalog of great training, including virtual labs, quizzes, and other premium features completely free for the first 7 days. That's cbtnuggets.com/cloudcast. Today's show is sponsored by Spot from NetApp, the cloud automation platform that makes it easy to deliver continuously optimized infrastructure at the lowest possible cost. Spot helps customers get the most out of their cloud investments by automating cloud infrastructure to ensure performance, reduce complexity, and optimize cost. Their machine learning and automation scale to exactly meet application needs using the most efficient mix of instances and pricing models, eliminating the risks of over-provisioning and cloud waste. Best of all, their software works with leading cloud platforms, services, and tools so that you can simplify and automate your cloud infrastructure wherever your workloads and applications run and however you run them. Discover how leading companies, from cloud-native startups to global enterprises, are automating, simplifying, and optimizing their cloud infrastructure with Spot by NetApp. Check them out at spot.io/cloudcast, where you can find more information, quest a demo, or even start a free trial. That's spot.io/cloudcast. And we're back. And Aaron, today is a Wednesday show, which normally means that we have a guest, but today we're not going to have a guest because you and I are both on the show, which is something that hasn't happened in we're sort of co-hosts and co-guests.
Yeah, I was going to say, am I the guest or are you the guest? But anyway.
Well, it'll depend on who's asking questions and who's giving answers. So do you remember, we're gonna get to the point of the show here in a second, but do you remember why we started the show in the first place? Like, what was the original thought process behind the show?
Yeah, so way back when, going back 10 plus years at this point, we had jobs that were, I'll just say, infrastructure based and based in Raleigh, and we kind of wanted to learn this cloud thing, but a lot of the stuff was in Silicon Valley, and Seattle wasn't even necessarily a hotspot yet. And
nope.
And we were like, we want to continue to learn and we want to continue to grow, but oh, by the way, we're in Raleigh, and how can we do that? Because for all intents and purposes, we were kind of fixed to a location. And I think that's kind of a theme of this show, is because a lot of us now are fixed to a location.
Yeah, it was, we were sort of like, hey, we're not close to the action. We're not close to what's going on. We don't get to go to these meetups every night, like happening in San Francisco. And yeah, how do we stay connected to it? And back, being remote wasn't that unusual, because VPNs had come along and people were letting companies had like remote locations, and then about halfway through the show, maybe 3 or 4 years into the show, things kind of centralized again, and companies wanted you to be in the office every day. And so it got me thinking, because my kids were in school this week for the first time in 529 days since they'd actually been in school, and I was like, I feel like everybody is now us. Everybody is now, people aren't back in the office. We've been doing this thing for a year and a half. Everybody is now the two hosts of the Cloudcast, and they're trying to figure out how to keep up with technology, without being at the center of the technology universe.
Yep, without a doubt. And yeah, to your point of 529 days, I mean, I think way back when, we did a show, and it was Ken Hoy and I. When this first started, it was show 442, and we kind of figured at the time, it was like, oh, we're going to work from home for say a month or two, or maybe 3-4 months tops, and so here's some tips. Because Ken and I and you and many others, like we worked remotely, and we kind of had this thing down. So if you're new to this work remote thing, this is how you can do it. And so here's some tips and tricks. Never really anticipating a year and a half later, we're still here.
No. And I think, I think about, all the people that I'm on daily Zoom calls and team calls and Meet calls and Hangout calls and WebEx calls with. Like, everybody went through the phase of, okay, I'm trying to find a place at my house that's quiet, and try not to have interruptions because everybody was home. And then they went through the phase of, some people have better microphones than me. They sound a little bit better than me, right? So it's kind of the evolution of not being in the meeting. And then people started making their backgrounds look a little nicer. They made the lighting look a little nicer. But at the same time, like, they're still going through the craziness of, like, I'm literally like in meetings, on calls all day long, maybe at 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. or whatever your world was. And that's taxing on you. And you start having to sort of reassess, like, how am I going to do this? Because I don't get breaks the way I used to. I don't have human interaction the way I used to. And even though you're not maybe traveling or you're home, you're still like, where am I going to find time to learn stuff?
Yep.
That I think is a thing that's dawned on me, and I'm assuming it's dawned on a lot of our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were talking before we hit record here, and how many Zoom calls do you think you've been on since everything shut down? It's been 529 days. Has it been more than 529 Zooms?
Oh God. I mean, it's a significant, so, some of those days are weekend days. So let's say it's really like 350 days or something. I mean, I probably know less than 3 to 5 a day. Now, some are shorter than others, but like, it wouldn't surprise me if it's close to 1,500 or 2,000 meetings of some sort.
Yep. And I will say mine has actually dropped off some over time because I feel like when everything first shut down, it was like the only way anyone could ever talk to anyone was to schedule a Zoom.
Right.
I do feel like, yeah, we kind of hit peak Zoom fatigue and moved past that. From a working standpoint, I mean, it's no secret. I don't love Slack, but I've learned to use and embrace Slack as a necessary evil.
Yeah.
And so, there's been other ways that everyone's been able to collaborate remotely, and it kind of leveled the playing field. Before we go into the learning section, talking about work habits for a second, I pre-pandemic was flying back and forth coast to coast, every other week, every 3 weeks. And that was pretty freaking grueling, but it was the way to kind of stay on par with everyone else who was making the trek in from the valley, and doing those commutes. And so with no one doing the commutes, it kind of leveled that playing field. So that actually, from me personally standpoint, I think a lot of other remote employees, that has been helpful. Now the Zoom fatigue and, changing habits and balancing work life, we'll talk about all that in a little bit. But I mean, that has certainly changed somewhat, but it's been interesting to see this play out over time.
Yeah. And we probably could do a whole show on the dynamics of, being in offices and what it means to, from a career perspective or even from a team perspective, like, what does it mean to be visible to your team? What does it mean to be around ideas around a whiteboard and all those sort of dynamics versus, hey, I'm here on the other end of a Zoom call or whatever. I went and looked this up because, like, I know a lot of people have read Malcolm Gladwell has a book out, and I forget what the title of it is, but it's basically, maybe it's 10,000 hours, but it basically talks about, like, how many hours do you need to become an expert? And he says, yeah, you need to have done something for about 10,000 hours to become an expert. But then I went and looked up this thing that people used to tell us when we first had kids, which was, if you do things enough times, it'll create a habit. And so I looked up, like how many days or how many times do you have to do something before it becomes a habit? And it turns out it's somewhere between 18 and 250 days to create a new habit, but on average it's about 66 days. Well, we're now 8 or 9 times 66 days.
Right.
I only bring that up because, like, I feel like, for a long time we said, well, when we get back to normal, we've now lived through 8 or 9 cycles of the thing that creates whatever your new normal is. And that's something that, I'm thinking more and more about, because I'm like, okay, well, maybe this is what it's going to be, even if the pandemic goes away, because we've lost. Like, I'll give you a great example. I was talking to our friend Stu Miniman this morning, who, is a veteran of many a trade show and many an event and stuff. And I was like, Stu, there is not one iota of any bit of my soul that has missed events at all. Like, none. Right. And like KubeCon's coming up in a week or two, and AWS reInvent. I'm like, there's no part of me that's like, oh, I can't wait for that. And that was part of our lives, right? That was a big part of how we learned and met people. And I don't know, like, I mean, maybe that's just because I haven't done it in 2 years, and it's just, if it happens, I'll knock the rust off. But what have you adopted in terms of things that you're like, these will probably become the new normal?
So first of all, I would say, from a trade show standpoint, let me say something about that real quick. I enjoyed going to trade shows, but not for the reasons most people would go. Like, most people want to attend breakout sessions or the big keynotes. Like, big keynotes I actually enjoyed because you could kind of get the big picture messaging and direction.
It's a show.
You could read between the lines a lot of times with stuff like that, right? So I enjoyed that, and it made you focus because you're sitting there in the audience. And if I'm doing it online, a lot of times I half pay attention. And I enjoyed the show floor. I enjoyed walking the show floor and talking to the different vendors, because you can get a lot out of that, sometimes even more so, of just like spend an hour or two. It's like super focused, hyper focused on something like that. So I really enjoyed those kinds of things. Do I miss trade shows? No, I do not. But to answer your question about the new work-related habits, I think the biggest thing for me is two things. I've actually developed a routine, which I've never had, because I never knew from week to week where I was going to be, or, I was going to be flying somewhere or doing this or doing that. And so everything was very, very ad hoc. Now it's like I get up in the morning, I work out and do all my other things, and then I get online and I check my email and I check my Slack and I kind of get my list for the day and figure out what meetings. Like, my day is much more structured than it used to be. Is that good or bad? I don't know, but it's different, and it's definitely a habit I've fallen into, and now I don't know that I would want to get out of that. And the other one you kind of mentioned already, and I just think this was just a natural progression of working remotely. I think a lot of us have upped our games, right? Like, we already had the good microphones for the podcast, but now I've got lighting, and I've got, nice camera, and I've got, a lot of these other things to be much more presentable on video, because that is such a huge portion of what I do now as well. So I think those are the two biggest things that have been new things for me.
Yeah, I think the one thing I've sort of done, because I mean, you traveled a good amount. I traveled a crazy amount. I would tend to sort of pack everything else in my life that wasn't work into the weekends. And now I just sort of find time during days or during the week. Like, I don't have any guilt or whatever about being like, yeah, I got to get this thing done. It's not work, but I'm going to do it on 2:00 at 2:00 on a Tuesday, because it just, I don't want to push it off a week. I don't want to have to ruin my weekend doing whatever the heck it was. And
right.
I think that's the one thing, is I've just sort of, I've created this just blur. I used to have very distinct lines between what was work and what was, life. And now I've just decided, like, I'm just going to blur them together, and I have no problem sort of just doing non-work stuff during what would people consider normal work hours, because I don't even know what normal work anymore.
Yeah. Well, and that'll kind of get to the core topic here of, like, so how are you learning these days?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, I mean, I feel like I still do a lot of the same habits I had before, right? I'm still reading a lot of what's going on. I still listen to podcasts. I've picked up a few here and there, and I've dropped a few here and there. And the podcast learning has been a little more tricky, because I think, there are still a few that I'm sort of diehard to listen to, and I learn a lot from. And there's others that maybe they don't come out as regularly as they did, and some other, because there's a million new podcasts, right? Like celebrity stuff and sports stuff and whatever it is. And, like, that will distract you for an hour. And if you get wrapped up in that, I'm actually going to do this thing that you sent me over, right? I've been wanting for a long time to sort of learn a programming language. I used to be very big into baseball. I used to play baseball, and you sent me this thing of, Python for analyzing baseball stats. So I'm going to try and combine this interest I have in learning something new with an actual interest I have, as opposed to being like, I'm just going to learn Java and then hope someday there'll be something useful. Now, like, you've given me something to be like, oh, I actually have a reason for wanting to deal with that. And my hope is, there will be other useful things once I sort of get familiar with it. So that's kind of how I'm doing it. But I'm curious, have you thought about it at all? Are you, in a stage where you're trying to learn some stuff?
Yeah. And so it's interesting. For me, this has been all about, we hadn't talked about it at all on the podcast, but I'm in a new role in my company. And so a lot of my learning has been more around on that new role. Like, it's still the same subject matter expert area, but it's a different part of the supply chain or in the organization. So I'm learning that, and I've been doing a lot of studying around that. And there's a ton of information out. So I'm in product management now, and it's actually surprising how well done it is as a discipline. There's podcasts on it, there's YouTube videos on it. So a lot of my learning has been absorbing things specifically around the philosophy of product management. So that's one area. But then in the technical area, I admit I kind of got away from it and go back to the craziness of life pre-COVID, and then kind of dealing with COVID and all of the adjustments. I hadn't done a lot of learning in a while. I completely admit it, but I did the same. But I actually did this a couple weeks ago and just barely got started. But there is some Python stuff that's out there, but it's actually Udemy courses.
Okay.
And the one, it's called Automate the Boring Stuff with Python. And I just thought that was a little bit like you. I was like, that sounds really interesting to me. So I've been more exploring Python as well, but in a different format than, like we were joking before we hit record of like hello world in Python. Like, I mean, I have a computer science degree and it can be really tedious at times. So I needed something fresh to do that.
Well, and the other thing I think, I think that the two biggest things for me as I'm thinking about this, if somebody said, hey, what would you recommend? I don't have a bias one way or the other if you should learn stuff that's more, kind of application and programming centric, or if you learn some stuff that's sort of cloud centric, right? Like there are great paths either way, whatever's sort of interesting to you. I think the biggest two tips I would give you is one, just block out time on your calendar, like literally put it on your calendar and call it whatever the heck you want. You can call it learning, or you can call it something that if your boss happens to have access to the calendar, they won't freak out about it. But like you got to physically put it on your calendar, right? Like if you just hope that it'll happen, other things will take up your time. And then the other one is, you and I have talked about this a million times, and we've been lucky enough to have sponsors like CBT Nuggets and A Cloud Guru and others. And the ability to get access to the stuff you need to learn is so much easier than it used to be for us. Like we had tons of friends who used to build home labs. Like they literally would have something in a room that would, heat up the room to 1,000 degrees. And they'd have to spend $3,000 or $4,000 on a few servers and a few with this, that, and the other. Like, you don't even have to buy like Raspberry Pis. You don't have to find and script. Like the stuff that's online, I think is really, really good. And whether you're getting a certification like you used to have 100 of, or you're just like, I want to learn some stuff, or even just like, I want to see if I want to learn this stuff. Like it is either free or cheap to do that. Like I can't recommend that enough.
Yeah. I started going through, I got sidetracked, but I started going through, it was a couple months ago now, the first AWS certification, and I did the A Cloud Guru, and their virtual learning environment of like, because it used to be you'd go through it and then it was like set up your own lab with your own accounts, but now they have it all set up and it's like a virtual sandbox that you play in that's theirs. And so even to see how far things like that have advanced. So if you maybe played with something like that before, and a lot of the, the online learning, this is the new thing. So if you haven't taken a look recently, go take a look again, because if that has been a hurdle for you, it shouldn't be anymore. So that's another suggestion I would have as well. The online learning things have become very interactive.
Yeah. Yeah, they're really good. They're both, like you said, they're easy to set up, but then they have, they've got communities around it. They've got like live tutors and stuff like that. So yeah, totally recommend that. And like I said, I can't emphasize enough, just block your own calendar, right? Like be the master of your own domain and so forth.
So for our next topic, like it's so funny. We've kind of become known at times for our crystal ball predictions. And sometimes we're right and sometimes we're horribly wrong, but we're at a weird stage right now of like, some people want to go back to the office. Some people don't want to go back to the office. Yeah. Some people, especially Silicon Valley people, they have monster commutes, and they may go back and maybe they don't have free lunches anymore. And now somebody's got to bring in, the stinky fish and heat it up in the microwave or whatever. Right. Like, what do you think is gonna happen? And then let's weave into like, how do people learn?
Yeah. I think so. All right. I'm going to start off by making a crazy prediction, and I'm crazy to predict this given where we are today. But like, let's suppose by next spring, people have the option to go back to an office, right? Like, assuming we're not on Delta variant 4 or something by then, and people haven't continued to do dumb stuff. But let's say that's an option. I think we're going to, from whatever point that is, so let's say it's March of next year, I think we're going to have like a year of I don't want to say chaos, but we're going to have all sorts of experimentations that are going to happen in terms of, well, do I have to come back 5 days? Do I have to come back 3 days? Well, I've been coming back 3 days and I feel like I'm really productive, but this other team, or my manager comes back in 5 and I feel like I need to be in front of them enough. And, they've offered me this perk if I don't commute. Like, we're going to go through a million different variations that companies are going to have, and different teams are going to talk about success and failure and all that sort of stuff. Like, I think that's going to go on for a year. And I think we're getting to a pretty interesting place at the end of it, like a good place, because companies have now figured out that I'm like, all right, I have all this technology we can use, and I can vary the offices, and I can cut down on my lease space and all this stuff. But I think we're going to have a year of like chaos whenever it happens, because nobody's going to know what the right thing to do is, and they're not prepared for, the whole generation of folks that like to complain about everything, and they've now kind of gotten things the way they are. No offense to the young folks, but that's just the way that they do stuff. I mean, it is what it is. That's sort of my prediction, which is more about like going into the office than, will people figure out ways to learn?
Well, and I'm going to go the opposite way with my prediction. I predict there's going to be a backlash. Backlash is a strong word, but I think the pendulum is going to swing back, not because people want to go back to the office, but because the executives want that you got to be here to grind culture back. And especially in Silicon Valley, like it's, if you're not here, you're not working. And if you're not eating lunch here and dinner here, and, it's all about FaceTime and let's be honest too, a lot of that was all complete bullshit anyway. It was just people being in the office because they felt like they had to be in the office, and they weren't nearly as productive as everyone thought they were. So it'll be like, I feel like it's going to swing back really hard that way, but then it's going to swing back to your point of like, it's going to swing back to something more what everyone wants. And I think we're like a year away from returning and experimenting, but we're probably another year out from settling in to like, call it the dominant 2 or 3 models.
Yeah. I think the other two things we're seeing and we will see, number one, allegedly, there is a crazy job market out there right now. Like, this is a buyer's market, if you will, for people shifting jobs and cloud jobs and all sorts of stuff. And I think that's a result of, right, there are points in time when, people sort of smart people who have influence look at the market and they go, if we really invest now, we can accelerate like crazy. And so there's going to be a big, set of shifts in jobs and people paying more money and all that sort of stuff. That's going to go on probably for a year or so now. I think the big opportunity for people, aside from, hey, I got a call, I'm going to take some other job, I'm getting a big salary. So this last year, everybody to a certain extent had quote unquote more free time because you weren't whatever. That didn't necessarily tend to pan out because we were all trying to figure out like, how do you live under a pandemic, and the politics of the world was crazy and he was spending time. But this next year, now that you've adapted to whatever your new normal is, like, if you're not taking advantage of some sort of like, I'm going to force myself to learn to get ahead, like this, there won't be another better time to do it than now. Yes. And the tools are there for you. Your ability to set your own schedule and be as flexible as you need to be. Sorry, got a little cough in my throat. Is there's no better time to do that than now. In fact, if you don't do it in this next year, you're gonna kind of look back and kick yourself and be like, that, this isn't going to happen again. Well, I shouldn't say that. Like, we could get another pandemic, but like, you probably won't get another opportunity like this one.
Yeah.
My gut feel.
Yeah. And to your point, like, take advantage of the change, take advantage of the turmoil in just schedules and who has to be where and how things are done. take advantage of that by setting aside time for yourself up front and hard blocking that time. And then the rest of the mindset just kind of goes around it from there. You know, the daily patterns and how work gets done. Pay yourself first, I guess, is the best way to look at it.
Yeah, that might be the way to think about it. My parents used to say that when I first got my first job. They said, hey, pay yourself first, which basically meant put some things in savings. But in this case, it probably should be, put some things in training and, do it. The good news is it's so cost effective to do it. Like you can do it. So, all right, man, we've yipped and yapped for a long time here. Any last thoughts before we wrap it up and take it home?
I would say the one last thought I'd have is, in addition to taking that time, the biggest thing that in talking to others about everything that's going on and working remotely and all of this, to your point, like, we should have more free time. I feel like a lot of people have even less free time, and I think it's because of not having those clear-cut lines between work and home. Because it tends to be the same place. Yep. So, I would say create the buckets. And it is a little bit of, you have a certain amount of work time, you have a certain amount of home time and personal life, and you have a certain amount of education time. Like, make sure you have 3 buckets at a minimum, and make sure you have some kind of work-life balance, because I do feel like, a lot of people working from home, they had to prove themselves, or they had to be hyper focused or hyper available. But we have to settle into this long haul. And I think a lot of people have done it well, but I do know some people that have not. And, step back, think about this a little bit. And are you set up for, we're not measuring this in months anymore. Like we just talked about, we're probably going to measure this in another year. So are you setting yourself up for another year?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're struggling, take care of yourself, ask for some help. Don't be afraid to ask for some help. Please don't take this as us telling you if you're having a hard time that you got to double down. Find the right balance for yourself and find some help if you need it, one way or the other, whether it's in training or just getting yourself right. So, cool, man. With that, I'm gonna kind of wrap it up, folks. As always, thanks for listening. I was looking the other day, we were in, 100 and some odd countries. And I was thinking, like, there's a whole bunch of countries down at the bottom of the list that had one person listening. And I was like, boy, that one person is the cloud genius for that entire country. That's, that's gotta be pretty cool. Like, you probably have to fix everybody's computer and printer, but you are the one cloud genius for that country. Yes. And we thank you for listening. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.